Hello, my name is Jennifer, and my sign name in British Sign Language is red hair. For a visual description, for anyone needs it, I am a white woman in my early 40s with red hair, with a blunt fringe, and today I'm wearing a pale pink dress. So I just wanted to start with talking a little bit about my background. So I am an artist, and I have always been an artist, but I don't make artwork anymore. I went to art school when I was younger, and then I went to university where I studied graphic design and illustration. I then did a master's in art, health and well-being, and for me that's what I'm really interested in, how art really improves people's well-being and improves their lives, and in a lot of cases keeps them alive and keeps them well. So when I finished my degree, when I did my master's, I worked with artists with schizophrenia, and I also worked with a lot of artists in the community with different health needs and different disabilities. And it was through that work that then, once I finished my degree, I'll start the sentence again, I went off track. When I was doing my degree, I found this book, which is Raw Creation, which is available in this space if anyone wants to look at it. And I fell in love with outsider art. And this particular piece in this book, which you'll see on the slide in a minute, is by an artist called Agnes Richter, and it's my favorite piece of work that exists. And this lady has her work in the Prinzhorn collection, which is in Germany. And this jacket was made from her straitjacket in the institution that she was living in, and she cut her straitjacket up, and then she used the linen from her bed to stitch words onto the inside of the jacket about how she was feeling at the time. And I think it's a very powerful piece of work. And they won't ever let this tour anymore because it's become so fragile. This book was written by John Mazels, who's in the center of that photo. And John Mazels is the editor of Raw Vision magazine, which is an outsider art magazine that's published around the world that showcases this kind of art in its many forms. And the guy on this side of the photo, if anyone may have seen him before, is Roger Cardinal. And Roger Cardinal is known for so-called coining the term outsider art as the English equivalent of art brut, which is the French term. And here is the little embroidered shirt. So my work when I was at university involved stitching text, and this is my work hanging alongside this little shirt in the Prinzhorn collection in Germany, and I embroidered these handkerchiefs as well. So it really inspired me and my artwork. And my artwork, when I used to make work, was all about bringing to the fore things that people don't want to talk about and things that people don't ever want to discuss, but doing it in a very subtle way so they don't realize that they're talking about these things. So when I finished my master's, I went to run a national arts charity in the UK that worked with over 2,000 artists who were outside of the mainstream, who may have been socially isolated, may have been disabled. I worked with people in prisons and in hospitals, and I worked to put on exhibitions and also do professional development opportunities for them. But with that organization, because it worked with so many people, I felt like I never really supported people in the way that I wanted to support them. So in 2017, I set up my own gallery called the Jennifer Lauren Gallery that, as it says here, my mission is to passionately champion self-taught, disabled, neurodivergent, and overlooked artists from around the world with the firm intention of making the art world more inclusive and accessible for all. When I'd set up my gallery, because it was all setting up and I had no money, I was pulling in favors from friends, favors from my parents, and I was also working in a day centre in Brighton, which is on the south coast of the UK. And that day centre involved one-to-one support and one-to-one care with disabled artists with quite challenging needs who, if they didn't have that care and support, they wouldn't be able to exist today. So I come at this work from a very different viewpoint to a lot of people that work in this field, because I come at it from a care point of view. and from a point of view that these people can't exist in this world without someone like me or the other people in those places supporting them with everyday tasks. So with my gallery, as I said, set it up in 2017, and I work with about 20 artists from around the world, and I mainly work with living artists. And what's really important for me is that I have a relationship with each of those artists. So when they're based in the UK, I like to go out for cake with them. When they're based around the world, I travel. Sometimes my partner comes with me, and we travel to meet the artists in their studios so that I still have that same relationship, and so we both know who each other are. What's really important to me, and something that I'm very passionate about, is being an advocate and an ally to these artists, and also giving agency back to the artists so that they can be seen on their own terms, in their own way, however that is, however they need to exist in the world. It's allowing that to happen so that they can stay true to who they are. So on these slides, you can see this is the kind of exhibition that I would normally put on in the UK. So I don't have a physical gallery space. I get to take over other people's spaces, or I pay to hire out a space and I put on an exhibition in that space. This is a really beautiful gallery space in Margate, which is on the south coast of the UK. And they invited me to do a show there, and it was the first time they've ever shown disabled artists in their gallery space. But it wasn't promoted as a disability art show. It was promoted as, these are 17 artists from around the world who are creating incredible works that you need to know about today. So the artist that you can see here is Naina Kalu, and I'll come back to talking about Naina later on. She's from London. And the artist along this wall is called Eric Derechette, and he works out of a disability art studio in Belgium. And he creates really beautiful work where he swooshes the lines one over the other whilst he's sitting down on the page on the wall in front of him. And what's really important to me with taking over spaces like this is it's challenging what contemporary art spaces show and what they put out there, and not putting it out there as a disability art show changes the views of their traditional audiences that come to see the show. So it's not that I'm trying to hide the information, I'm trying to challenge the people who come to the shows about what they consider art and who they consider to be an artist. One of the other things that I do is this picture here shows a group of artists with acquired brain injuries. And Terza, who's in the exhibition, is actually here in this photo. And for this exhibition, I worked with a friend of mine as a curatorial advisor on an exhibition in London that happened a couple of years ago. And it was a steering group of 12 people with acquired brain injuries, and I worked with them as a curatorial advisor to plan out the exhibition alongside them so that there's no hierarchy involved. Everyone was involved on an equal footing, and they were very much involved in every decision that was made. So they were involved in selecting who the graphic designers were. They were involved in selecting who the person would be to build things in the space. So every step of the way, they were involved in interviewing people and everything. It was a really beautiful two-way experience and learning that happened. So I said I do the Outsider Art Fair in New York every year, and although it's called the Outsider Art Fair, I don't ever say the artists that I work with are outsider artists, which I'm going to talk about later on. But I do that fair because it's a very friendly fair of people coming from all across the world to visit and see the artists, and they genuinely are really interested in the artwork, and it's not necessarily about the stories behind the artists. But lots of famous people come to this fair because they're genuinely really interested in this field and in this incredible artwork that's created. This was an exhibition that I did last year, which is part of a project called Shift, which I do, and Shift exists as a platform to make people more aware of learning disabled and neurodivergent artists specifically who work out of studios across England. And this show had 8 artists in it working from 8 different studios around the UK. This is Naina's work again. And each artist had a film made about them, which I made initially, and then the exhibition came afterwards. And for me, film is a really accessible medium, and I had sign language embedded into every film, as well as captions, so that the films are really available to a wide group of people to kind of learn about the artists. But through film, you really can see the voice of the artist. So there was 2 artists in this show that are non-verbal, and all you got to do was see how they communicate through their artwork, through the making in the spaces, which to me is very beautiful. This show was on for 5 months in a museum in the UK, and it's very rare for a UK museum to showcase this kind of work. And over the course of 5 months, they had 90,000 visitors, which is a huge number of visitors to come specifically to see a show of disabled people from all across the UK. So I'm very proud that that happened. But for me, with this show, I also wanted the artists to be involved. So they were involved in selecting the work with me that got shown. And where possible, the artists came and led events or talks in the space. So Thompson came and ran a workshop where people got to paint in the space. James came and ran an embroidery workshop, and he does cross-stitch embroidery, and he taught people how to do cross-stitch, but his way of doing cross-stitch, which is different to how you would normally do cross-stitch. And other people just came and drew live in the space so that people could see them drawing, and they didn't necessarily interact with the audiences that came that day. You'll notice in this exhibition, and what I do in a lot of my exhibitions, is that I really try to embed access from the start. So this is the interactive room for this exhibition. So normally there are 2 films on this wall where you get to learn a bit more about the artists, and the captions are in Japanese. So you can see the artist who has created some of the work in the exhibition. There's normally a touch table in here where people can feel some of the materials that have been used to make the artworks, which is especially good for blind and visually impaired people. There'll also be a sign language video which they're filming this week, which will be in the space. And there is an easy read guide. And easy read guides, I believe, don't really exist in Japan, but in the UK they're used quite a lot. And it's a way of presenting the information in a very simplified format, where there's very simple images and symbols with really plain English text, which is aimed at autistic and neurodivergent people to access the information in a way suited to them, or is good for children to use, because again, it's very simplified. So this photo you'll see here is from the Nottingham show, and one of the autistic artists I work with called it like a suite, like a buffet of information that was in access information, which I loved the term buffet of information for people. And then this photo is another artist that I work with called Joyce, and I'm really passionate, as I said, about having the artists share their voice on their own terms. So we were sat on a comfy sofa, which Joyce wanted to be sat on during her exhibition, so that she could talk about her artwork and felt comfortable with me in the space to share things she may not have already wanted to share if I wasn't there to kind of tweak it out of her. Some of the other things that I do something called Meet the Collector series, where I interview collectors around the world of folk art, outsider art, and art Brut, and I house them on my website, and I'm in a conversation with someone at the moment to hopefully make them into a book. And as you can see, these people's collections are vast, and often they're floor-to-ceiling artworks. They're incredible collections, and I feel very privileged that sometimes I get to go to these collectors' houses, and sometimes I just interview them on Zoom. These are some other projects that I run. I've already mentioned Shift, but Signs of Art is a project that it's co-led by deaf people, and we got some funding in the UK to run a project where we researched into galleries and museums around the UK to see what their offer was for deaf people, which was pretty much non-existent in many museums and galleries. And then we set about looking to try and change that. So I work with a lot of galleries and museums to work with deaf people to get sign language into the museums and galleries, and to make sure they're aware they need to program sign language tours whilst the exhibitions are on, so that deaf and hard of hearing people feel welcomed into the spaces. And then Art at Arles is a project with me, another lady that lives in London, and a lady in Australia. And it's a project where we work with disabled and non-disabled artists together, and they collaborate over Zoom, making new artwork together that gets to go into exhibitions. And again, that is a two-way learning exercise. It's always cross-culture, so they learn about new cultures. We also pair some of the disabled artists with collectors or curators to learn again from them, to have outcomes that come out of that as well. The final thing to mention that I do in the UK, I do a lot of work outside of my gallery with disabled artists in the UK, doing mentoring, doing professional development, allowing people to learn about how to run workshops. And then I program those workshops, so they get to go into galleries and museums to deliver those workshops, and I am there as support if they need me there as support. I've also been working with the Tate in the UK on a creative access toolkit about how galleries and museums can better work with and support deaf, disabled and neurodivergent artists. And that's gone out to all the visual arts organisations, all the big museums and galleries across the UK, and it's a very large document covering everything from an accessible hanging height to the kind of language and terminology you should be using, to how to put simple contracts in place when you work with disabled people, and more. And this is just what's coming soon. So I'm working on a big project in Philadelphia at the moment, which is called Look Here. And it involves 2 exhibitions, a symposium and a book, and it's all about disability art studios in America and their place within the contemporary art world in America. So one of the exhibitions I am co-curating with 2 learning disabled artists. A second exhibition I'm curating is of 33 artists working out of all different studios across America. The book will be about, it will have academics and artists writing about this field, and I am writing a chapter on co-curation and access. And the symposium is all about best practice for supported studios in America, but also bringing in curators to challenge them and to talk about ways they can have more of this work within their galleries and museums. So that's me in a nutshell. So I'm going to talk a bit about the artists in the exhibition. And this is photos of each of the artists, minus Jesse, because Jesse is very private and he does not like having his photo taken. So I'll talk about Jesse first because he's not pictured here. Jesse is the youngest artist in the exhibition. He is 32 years old and he actually has agoraphobia, so he doesn't really ever leave his house other than to go to the shop over the road to buy cigarettes. His work, when you see it in the exhibition, is very surreal. He doesn't ever plan his work. I saw his work at a hospital in London that he'd been in for his mental health, and I think his work is incredible. And he said that his work is really exciting to him, and he never knows what's going to come out, and that kind of gives him this thrill to continue working on the pieces. And he spends about 6 months working on one piece of work. So then we'll go through them in order. So this is Nigel. Nigel was 67 when he died in 2016. And Nigel drew women, and always women in beautiful ball gowns. So these were women that he knew or that he worked with, but they never obviously had a ball gown on. He just always drew women in these big billowing gowns. But before that, he would draw the woman basically nude and then drew the dresses on top of them. And when you look at the drawings, there's these beautiful, delicate pencil marks that make up the pictures. Their eyes often blend into their hair. They have very delicate, wispy marks for their noses. And Nigel works out of a studio called Action Space, which is in London, that specifically works with learning disabled artists. The next photo is Scotty Wilson. And Scotty Wilson is also dead. Scotty Wilson died in 1972 when he was 71 years old. And we have 3 pieces of his work in the exhibition. And he grew up in Glasgow, but in the 30s, he went over to Canada and he opened a second-hand shop. He used some fountain pens from that second-hand shop to do some drawings, some doodles on the desk that he was at in the second-hand shop. And he really liked those, and that's what inspired him to keep on making. And he then came back to London in the 40s and continued making art, but was always seen as on the outside of the art world. Scotty Wilson was actually born called Louis Freeman, and he was served on the Western Front in World War I. And with his work, you'll see flowers and birds, and then he did these things called greedies and evils. We're going to come back to Andrew because his mum and dad are here, and his mum's going to say a few words in a minute. So we'll go on to Madge Gill. This is one of Madge Gill's very large pieces that she was working on. So Madge Gill died in 61, and she was 79 years old when she died. And in England, she is one of the most famous outsider artists, and she was known as a mediumistic artist. So by that we mean that she felt that she was guided by somebody else, and that somebody else was called Mironest. So she said that the work was never hers, the work belonged to this person. So when she was alive, she would never sell the work because it wasn't her work to sell. And she's very well known for drawing female faces across the pieces. So sometimes they were tiny, sometimes they were meters and meters long, and then they were all filled in with abstract patterns, block shapes, grids, whatever came to her while she was making. The next photo is Terence Wilde, and Terence has this long curly moustache which he likes to wax. So Terence is 62 years old and lives in London, and he did go to art school when he was younger, but he did fashion, print, textile design. And then through a series of events that happened in his life, he ended up in the mental health system, and now he does drawing and ceramics. And in particular with his ceramics, he's completely self-taught, so he's learned himself how to make the work that he makes that you'll see in the exhibition today. Terence describes himself as an adult survivor, and by that we mean that he had a lot of bad things that happened in his life, and he has survived them, and he puts that into his artwork. So he often makes notes, he writes little words, he overhears things, and that's what inspires his work. And he said that if he didn't make art, he would become really unwell, and that he'd rather stay up late making art than end up in A&E because he's drank too much or done something stupid. You'll see in the exhibition sometimes he puts words onto his ceramics as well, so have a look closely, and there's little faces embedded into them and lots of hidden things. So underneath Terence is Cara McWilliam, and Cara actually lives 10 minutes away from me in Manchester. And Cara is a 53-year-old artist who only started making art in 2019. And this was after she had a very severe relapse with her illness. And one of her friends suggested to her that she should try to make some artwork. And the pieces that you'll see in the exhibition are actually made out of polymer clay, which is like a Fimo, which is a very soft material that you move and you push it about, and she works it, and then you put it in the oven and you bake it for 30 minutes, and it goes hard, and she wants it to look like porcelain. And she does this because she can't actually use clay, because clay is too hard for her to use, because she has an energy limiting condition, meaning she has very little strength to do things that we could do very easily. And with the pieces in the exhibition, they're made up from lots of tiny pieces. So on the touch table, you'll see some smaller pieces. It's made out of those, and they're all stacked on top of each other, and they're very precariously balanced, and at any moment they could fall over. And she did that because she wanted them to mimic her disability, and at any moment she could have a relapse and become very unwell. So she wanted the two to go together. Next to that is Kathy Ward. And Kathy is a 65-year-old artist that lives in London, but she grew up in a convent and then went off to Canada and America and said that these spiritual events happened in her life. And then when she came back to London, because of many bereavements in her life and because of her illness, her work drastically changed. So the work that you see in the exhibition is work from that period. And they kind of look like pieces of hair, like strands of hair. And it's like a piece of clay at the back that's got black over the top of it, and then she scratches back into them, and that's why you see these kind of hair-like waves in the drawings that she does. And there's actually an interview on one of these screens where she talks about the drawings in the exhibition. So if you come back another time, you'll get to see those. The next artist is Tirza, and she works out of a studio called Submit to Love Studios, and she's been there for 20 years. And she has an acquired brain injury. The work in the exhibition is quite new for her, the black and white work in a large scale. And she likes doing this because she can fill in the spaces with all these different little marks and patterns that pop into her mind. And the piece in the exhibition is called When Women and Fish Ruled the World. And so you'll see she created hybrid characters where sometimes it's a woman's head with an octopus's bottom, or a lady's legs, and then a head of a fish. Then we have Cameron Morgan, and Cameron works out of Projectability, which is in Scotland, which is a studio, and he's been there for over 30 years. And he makes things in bodies of work. So he comes up with the theme, and then he'll work through that theme, often across several different mediums. And in the exhibition here, we have a series of cameras. And I like the fact that they're in Japan, because Japan is known as the home of the camera. So Cameron is very excited that his cameras are in Japan. The embroidered straps on the cameras are a new thing for him. So he's taught himself how to sew, and so he wanted to make these straps going round the cameras. Because he has lots of old cameras that he's had from over the years, and he wanted to document each of them, and he said that they always have a strap around them, so he felt like he needed to add that into the ceramic piece. And this artist on the end is Valerie Potter, and she's the oldest living artist in the exhibition. She's 71 years old, and in the exhibition we're showcasing her cross-stitch works, and she does these still very often to this day. Valerie actually grew up in Jamaica and Nigeria with her family, so she was surrounded by pattern and bright colours all the time, and that really comes through in her work that we still see today. And she has a really wild imagination. So if you look at the drawings, sometimes she describes them as flowers from Venus, or flowers from Mars, or aliens, or, you know, that's a rabbit eating a carrot sat on a car. It's something that's popped into her head for that day that she needs to get out onto a piece of paper. And now I'm going to invite Joan up, who's Andrew's mom.
I really enjoyed listening to Jennifer tell her story, because I had no idea how much she has done. I'm so impressed. It's unbelievable. But about Andrew, Andrew is profoundly autistic. He is non-verbal, and he needs 24/7 care. Anyway, he never did any art at all until he was in his early 20s, but I knew he could draw. And all the support places and schools that he went to, they had him doing things like colouring in, or painting a bottle, or, you know, very simplistic things that didn't really involve a lot of creativity. And the only time he went to a gallery, he would go straight into the cafe to get a Coca-Cola. He wasn't interested in anything else. But I knew he could draw, so one day I asked one of his carers if he would take him to the museum, which is full of animals, and give him some paper and a pen, which we did, and he came back with these amazing drawings. Now, I did laugh when I saw that photograph of my son up there, because, number one, it's one of his special faces. He doesn't know how to smile for the camera, and he usually pulls the most horrendous faces, like, you know, and they can be quite scary. So over the years, we have taught him to just, it might be okay if you just try that. And then he's got his thumb up because he says yes to everything, because that's just how positive he is, even though he hasn't got an idea about what you are asking him. He will just say yes anyway, because he wants to be engaged all the time. I think that picture is of some recent work he's done. He's been supported occasionally by Jennifer and other organisations that she's very close to. And through these organisations, they are exactly the type of place that helps a person like my son, who couldn't actually go out that front door and walk down the street in safety. And he has been in Tate, Liverpool. He's worked at the museum one day a week being an artist. He has been at the Whitworth Gallery. He did a portrait of the Queen, very pop art, and it's their best-selling small print that they've ever had, so they told me. I'm very, very, very delighted. My husband and I are so happy that Jennifer selected Andrew's work for this show. We felt it was such an honour that we just decided to just come on an airplane and come straight over. And, you know, thank you to the gallery for, you know, showing this event. I think it's so important. And thank you, Jennifer, for all the work you do. And everywhere we've been in Tokyo, we've been here 3 days, everyone has been gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. I love Japan, and we would love to come back.
I just wanted to show this slide because this is Roger Cardinal's diaries. He had about 95 diaries that he wrote in every day throughout the course of a lot of his life, right until he passed away. And this is Valerie Potter's drawing in Roger Cardinal's diary. And he says some really lovely words in it, and I'm going to read you a little snippet when I find my piece of paper. So this is from 1985. He describes Valerie's drawings as having the mediumistic touch, that sense of an endless ribbon of frenzied patterning emerging like, I can't even read my own handwriting, like compulsive knitting, which makes me laugh because Valerie knits every single day of her life. And this is an extract from a conversation in 1964 between Scotty Wilson and Victor Musgrave. Victor Musgrave set up a collection of outsider art with his wife, Monica Kinley, and this collection is housed in Manchester near where I live. And you can see from this that Scotty spoke in his own kind of way. And if you look and if you understood English language, you'd see some particular words that he uses. But he says, but I've just shown you, so when I say mine is real, mine is, it's there. You're born with it, you can't explain it. It's all right, everyone's got their own imagination, but it's a thing you can't say yes, it's a thing you can't say no. If I say it's people guiding me, one way or another, there's something there, you can't explain it, no one can. It's only you. So I wanted to touch on what the field is like in the UK for disabled artists and around the outsider art field in the UK. So this photograph is from the 1979 Outsiders show, which was at the Hayward Gallery, which Roger Cardinal curated alongside Victor Musgrave. And these have very famous outsider arts from around the world in it. But in the UK, this exhibition was panned. It was hated by art critics and had the most negative press written about it. And this is one of the articles that has the headline, "The catalogue is awful too." And one of the lines in this newspaper review says, "It is often the work of lunatics, only of interest to those concerned with mental medicine or of information to sociologists. The artwork has limited artistic merit." And another article said, "Come and meet the misfits." So you'll see, it seems like in the UK, the press really don't understand this work and see it as having very little value. And even still today, we still get pieces like this that come out, which I'll show you one in a moment. But this is a little more on Roger Cardinal. So I'm very close to his wife, Agnes, and I've been working with my friend Vivian since Roger has passed away to help sort out his house. And now his whole archive of letters with artists, letters with Jean de Buffet, letters with André Breton, have all gone to the Tate for people to be able to research that for years to come. So this is his diaries in his house, all labelled, all numbered, and there was about 95 of them in existence. And these diaries are full of, he'd write in them every day. They'd be full of places he'd been to, exhibitions he'd seen, his own little drawings that he did, sometimes inspired by things that he's seen, sometimes him drawing a little castle he'd visited that day, loads of things. But what was really interesting is when his show opened in 1979, although he writes in his diary every day, he didn't write in it for 8 days after. And Agnes said that was because he was so affected by the negative press that was written about the exhibition that he couldn't bring himself to write in his diary. And I've included this picture by Joseph Yoakum, who's a famous American outsider artist, because we found this down the side of the bed. And this is a very famous artist worth a lot of money. And it was tucked up in a folder. It had never seen the light of day since he got it from Phyllis Kind Gallery in America. So we sold it so that the money could go back to Agnes and her children. And now this is in a collection in America. This was an exhibition that was very well received in England in the press. And this is Japanese outsider art, which was at the Wellcome Collection in 2013. And pretty much all of the press about this show was very positive, which is in a stark contrast to much of the other press that we see about this field. So I wanted to include this because I thought it was quite funny that Japanese has this very positive press and the rest of the disabled artists in the UK, not so much. In the UK, we have very few places that showcase this kind of art or art like this from around the world. But this is the Gallery of Everything, which is in London, on quite a posh street in London. So the people around there are very rich. And this was actually a show of Valerie Potter's embroideries that was in this show a few years ago. But this is one of very few places that exist. And this is why places like this exhibition in Japan should be cherished, because they're very rare, and it's really important that these places continue to promote this work, but also that galleries and museums include it in their spaces, and we need to keep pushing back to challenge the work that they show in those spaces, because these artists deserve to be seen in contemporary museums and galleries around the world. This is a very rare 5-star review in the UK from 2023. And this is the show that I co-curated with the artist with acquired brain injuries. And it was a very positive review. It got 5 stars in The Guardian, which is one of the main newspapers in England. And it was glowing throughout the review. And I just wanted to show that occasionally we do have these things in the UK and people do get it and understand it. This is to show that, like in Japan, there's many studios that exist to support disabled artists. So this morning I went to visit Atelier Grapefruit, which is a small studio in Tokyo that supports disabled artists. And these are the 4 studios that support 4 of the artists in the exhibition. And if you're not aware, a disability art studio is a place that disabled artists go to with all different kinds of disabilities, and they're nurtured to create work on their own terms, in their own way, about whatever they want to make. So it's not set instructions, they're not forced to make things, it's about giving the individual agency to make what they want to make. And the facilitator is just there to kind of provide what that person needs in order to move forward and kind of do whatever they want to do. In the UK, we have something called the Turner Prize, which has been going since 1984. And the Turner Prize exists to give recognition to British artists who are doing, who at that moment were doing incredible work. And a few years ago, it was decided that collectives were going to be nominated. So normally it's 4 individual artists, but for 2021, different collectives were chosen across the UK. And Project Artworks is a disability art studio in Hastings, and they were up for the Turner Prize, which was a rarity. This had never happened. We'd never seen disabled artists profiled in the spotlight like this, so it was a really big thing in the UK. And what's even more impressive now is Naina Kalu, who I mentioned at the start. Firstly, her work is now in the Tate, and we believe it might be the first learning disabled artist that the Tate has ever purchased. And Naina created this live in my exhibition in Margate. She works on 2 drawings at the same time. It takes 2 days to make these. These are huge drawings. And then the Tate bought this for their collection, which is incredible. And now, this year, Naina is the first learning disabled artist ever to be up for the Turner Prize, which is just incredible. But this is where the press comes into it. And this is the 2 different sides of the press in the UK. On the right, we have a very thoughtful piece that's been written. They're both from the Guardian newspaper. But the piece on the right is very thoughtful, very considered. This person has really got to know the artist and know their practice, and has written a very powerful piece and spoke to the people that work with Naina. The piece on the left, that came out first before the second piece, is very negative. It says, it describes a bit about Naina's work. So it says, what Naina Kalu makes, hanging her multicoloured tangles of streamers and strands in poetical arrangements. These craftily wrought sculptures won't scare or amaze anyone. Kalu's work has a familiar appearance, and that's not just because she's been doing this stuff for 2 decades before recently getting recognition. It's because this kind of post-minimalist, found yet handwork sculpture has dried out, attenuated roots in art movements, and that started way back in the 1960s. Nice, academic, dull. If you remember seeing the photo at the beginning, how brightly coloured and interesting Naina's work is, it's hardly dull, it's the opposite of dull. It couldn't be any brighter or poppier. And Naina has never been to art school. It's not academic in the slightest. She cannot read, she cannot write, she is non-verbal, and these are all born from her imagination and her intense need to make. So what you can see here is this person has not done their research, does not understand how artists like Naina works, and has put out this poorly written article, which I just think is horrendous. And this shows today that the press in the UK still doesn't get this. And when you speak to some of the press, because it's very rare to get press written about this work in the UK, some people say that there's a fear of writing about it because there's a fear of them saying the wrong thing, of using the wrong language. And rather than checking with people or checking with the studios that work with these artists, they would rather just not write about it. They don't seem to want to have that conversation, which is deeply frustrating. But things are changing a little bit in terms of what's programmed in museums. This was a beautiful show last year of Andrew Omerding, who works out of Action Space, the same as Nigel. And this was his first institutional show at Camden Arts Centre, and he was allowed into the space to build these beautiful found object sculptures. It was called Animals to Remember Uganda. So it's about where he's from, it's about his family, it's all twisted in with different fabrics and things that he's found. There's bits of bike in them. And this is a beautiful way of showcasing what institutions can do if they put the right things in place to work with disabled artists and allow them enough time to develop things in their own way, on their own terms. I'm aware I'm about to go over, so I'm going to skip over this slide. I just briefly wanted to talk about the fact that I work with quite a lot of Japanese disabled artists. This is Yoshihiro Watanabe, and I don't know if anyone's ever seen these before, but these are made out of Japanese oak leaves. So one leaf makes one animal, and it's like origami. There's no glue or anything involved. He can only make them for 2 months of the year when the leaf is exactly right for him to make the work. These are some of the other Japanese artists, and I won't go into these, but Shinichi Sawada, who made these, is probably one of the most well-known Japanese disabled artists to come out of Japan and be known throughout the world. His work is now in collections all over the world. This was a solo show in New York 2 years ago, which got rave reviews in the New York Times. He's just had a museum touring show in America, and they've made a new book about him. And he's now got work in the Pompidou Center in Paris, which is currently on display in a big exhibition. The final thing I kind of want to end on was how the term outsider art is used in the UK, and the fact that it's not really used in the UK. So it's kind of become this umbrella term that incorporates many other different things than what it was originally intended to accommodate. And because of that, some people find it quite offensive, because you're saying that these artists are outside of something, and what are you saying they're outside of, and who is determining who is on the inside, who is on the outside? So in the UK, we work with the artists or those that support them to see how the artist wants to self-define and how they want to describe themselves. So some just want to be called artists, some want to be called disabled artists or autistic artists. Some want to be known as an artist and then say that they are affiliated with a studio. So then you go to look at what the studio does, but they don't directly say it, and therefore they're not directly mentioning their disability. So that's how we use it in the UK. And if I was to go on and talk about outsider art, we would be here all afternoon. So this is me. You can find me on social media. You can look more about me on my website. There is sign language on my website, but it is in English. So that's not very useful, I hear, for Japanese people, but it is on there for people to use it. And now I think we're going to go into Q&A, but thank you so much for listening today.